Great. Thank you all for joining us today. We're joined by four brilliant guest speakers, Zach Whale from Grain Growers, Jane Camilleri from Bega Group, and Melissa Ballas from Bega as well, and Robert Poole from Corporate Value Associate Partners Australia. We'll just wait a minute or two for everyone to jump online, and then we'll get straight underway. So we'll just give it 1 minute. Great. Well, there's still a few people streaming in, but we'll start. And I'll just start with a quick acknowledgement of country. So Farmers for Climate Action acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting and pays respects to elders past and present, and extends that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be present today. I'm coming to you from Melbourne, so from Wurundjeri land, and our speakers are located from all around Australia. And our first speaker today is Zach from Grain Growers. So Zach, I'll hand over to you and you'll be able to share your screen once I stop sharing. Great.
Perfect. That's coming up okay?
Yeah, we can see you now.
Fantastic. Well, look, firstly, thank you very much for having me. Thrilled to be here today to give some perspectives on global disruptions in grain. And what I'm really going to try to do as quickly as I can is sort of outline how important Australian grain is on the world market and some of the factors that happen in world markets that impact grain supply chains, and touch on geopolitics and a few other little things that I'm sure many people in the grains industry will be thinking about at the moment. So I'm Zach Whale. I'm the General Manager of the Policy and Advocacy team at Grain Growers. And Grain Growers really seeks to ensure the profitability and sustainability of Australian grain farmers. Growers are at the heart of everything that we do. And among other things, we do focus on trade and market access and how to make sure, we get our grains to the markets that they're best suited for around the world. And as some of you would know, we also do a considerable amount on sustainability and have joint carriage of the grain sustainability framework. So, I think it's really important. Geopolitics is a big thing, conflict's a big thing, but climatic events and natural disasters also have a really significant impact on the global grain market. We saw a couple of years ago, significant drought in Canada led to canola pricing in Australia go through the roof. At the moment, we've got severe drought in South America. We've got wildfires in Chile. We've got nightly blackouts in Ecuador because of the limited water going through their hydroelectric plants. Now, when this happens, Australian grain sometimes has an unnatural, market in South America, which we don't usually see. But climatic issues in other parts of the country certainly, impact what's happening here in Australia. And similarly, the Australian grain production environment, as you all know, is severely impacted by the weather. Last year, we saw rice shortages in Indonesia and the army actually being involved in parts of their agricultural system because of that. So, regularly we see, climate wreaking havoc. What does it mean in the Australian context? I think it means that we need to make sure that government's placing appropriate resourcing and consideration on climate resilience and making sure our infrastructure systems, can actually stand up to the challenge. We've seen rail lines go underwater. We saw Victoria's road network almost fall over a couple of years ago due to the wet seasonal conditions. So we have to place a strong emphasis on climate resilience in our infrastructure networks, as well as how we farm and how we make sure we can continue to grow in a more hostile growing environment. It's also important to note that while Australia is a modest producer of grain internationally, about 3%, we're between 10 and 15% of globally traded grain. Most of the largest trading nations in the world are also the largest producing nations in the world are usually also the largest consumers. Australia, on the other hand, exports around 70% of what we produce. So, climatic events and natural disasters, have an impact. Around 30% of globally traded grain comes out of the Black Sea region. And so naturally, when you see conflict between countries like Russia and Ukraine, that wreaks havoc on our global pricing, and importantly, wreaks havoc on food insecure nations. So while Australia may not ordinarily provide grain to, say, countries like Egypt, when you take 30% of globally traded grain out of the equation, our grain becomes far more important in terms of ensuring that countries can access the protein they need. And what we see when there's uncertainty in global grain markets, countries impose export restrictions to protect their domestic stocks, and a range of things happen, and we see a range of interventions in markets, to ensure that countries have the food they need for their hungry populations. Also, a lot of fertilizer comes out of Russia. So again, conflict in that region also has implications for fertilizer, as we know. The Middle East. So, I mean, if you look at the conflict in Palestine, Israel, Gaza, that they're not traditional grain markets or not markets of considerable size, but there's a flow-on impact because we see global shipping disruptions. In the Red Sea, we see insurance premiums for shipping lines skyrocket because Houthi rebels out of Yemen, start to interfere with shipping lines. So again, something that happened in a non-traditional grain market starts to have an impact on how global shipping is taking place and how products get from Asia and Europe, to other parts of the world, with ships now needing to be rerouted via the Cape of Good Hope. And there's some commentary out there indicating that has increased transit times by around 40%. So, Russia and Ukraine, that's been happening for some time. We sort of understand that the Middle East, highly regrettable and human tragedy is acute, also having, an impact on what's happening at the moment. So a couple of conflicts there, to sort of give context to, to how conflicts can interfere with or have an impact on markets. Separate to politics. So politics also has a huge impact on markets. So, the United States has been a huge power in the mercantile system, in how we trade goods and services around the world for a very long time. And it's become increasingly protectionist. Trump, if elected in November, has promised a 60% tariff on China and a 10% tariff on everybody else, with many commentators saying that that's possibly going to lead to a free-for-all. And this, in inverted commas, rules-based order that we have appreciated in global trading over the last few years might be a thing of the past. Now, it's not just about Trump, because Harris is actually likely to be more protectionist, than a lot of other, regimes that we've seen in the past. So, it's not just a Trump v. Harris. It's actually likely to be a protectionist United States, regardless of who wins. We've seen the United States, destabilize the World Trade Organization over the last few years, which has sort of meant that other countries are having to rely on other mechanisms to solve international trade problems. For a long time, the WTO has been sort of the orthodoxy. It's been the arbiter. It has been the umpire. The Australian government, went through that process when China imposed sanctions on Australian barley. But if countries and big countries use it less, block appointments to some of those, what's called the appellate bodies, that really minimises its effectiveness. And for a middle power like Australia, that's a problem. If you're like America and China, you can probably run your own race and get away with it because you're so big. A country like Australia would really struggle in the absence of a rules-based order and in the absence of a more predictable way in which countries agree to undertake international trade. So I think the United States is going to be on everyone's mind for the next couple of months. It's really important what happens there. I think Trump and those tariffs will really cause ripples, but I think it's fair to say that there's going to be more protectionism in global in the way in which countries undertake their, trade strategies, regardless of who wins in November. But, watch this space. You can't really talk about global politics, geopolitics, international trade without talking about China. And it's fascinating that 120 countries have China as its largest trading partner, and Australia is no exception for both imports and exports. So a huge market that every country wants to be in, but with huge markets that have massive buying power and pull in a majority of our commodities. If that market softens, or if indeed politics gets involved and that market blocks you, there's huge implications. In the Australian context, we saw that with barley, but we also saw it with coal, with timber, with beef, and a range of other things. So, you know, it wasn't Napoleon who said it. I did some research yesterday, but, you know, when she wakes, she'll shake the world. Well, China has been shaking the world. It's overtaken everyone else in terms of being a major international player. And as a result, we're quite exposed to the disruptions that flow on from that. However, the Australian government and others have done a really good job to ensure that we diversify as much as possible, so that we've got doors opening in countries all around the world. And in our case, you know, Grains Australia and the like, making sure that we do have options if and when these big markets are disrupted. There's an economic downturn, you know, happening in China, so that will soften demand. It's a highly political trade environment. There's increased focus on domestic productions and new national food security laws. You know, so China, you know, it's still buying a lot of our barley and wheat, but you know, will be an interesting market to watch moving forward. So look, I think. You know, there's a lot of factors at play. I only had 10 minutes, so I sort of couldn't go into, you know, a lot of depth. But I think we've got natural disasters on one hand, which Australia, you know, absolutely needs to focus on at home to make sure that we have enough resilience in our systems so that we can get our products where they need to be, and we can get inputs into Australia so that we can keep producing. So, you know, we need to build resilience. And we also need to acknowledge that Australia is increasingly going to become an important food security partner for countries that are grain dependent. Look no further than Indonesia to our north. It's traditionally our largest wheat market. China's overtaken it recently, but it has the long-term record. You know, our ability to provide you know, grain to those markets is really important. So, you know, I think there's a lot of moving parts. Add natural disasters with politics and with conflict, and it's a dicey environment. There's upside sometimes for Australia, but that's a sort of awkward thing to say because we never want to benefit from the misery that these things cause. But I think more importantly and more strategically, we just have to make sure that we can keep providing you know, food to those countries that need it, and that we make sure we build resilience in Australia so that we can overcome these natural adversities and we can keep producing. And that's 11 minutes, so I'll pull up there.
Great. Thanks, Zach. And I think it's really great to hear you speak and to talk about, you know, those challenges that we see around supply chains and how those link in with, you know, climate change and natural disasters to the international perspective. So thank you so much. Next up, we have Jane and Melissa from Bega Group. So Jane is the Sustainable Programs Manager at Bega, and Melissa is the Senior Environment and Sustainability Officer at Bega. And we're thrilled to have them along today as well. So I'll hand over to you, Jane, and Melissa.
Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. Thanks. And yeah, again, thanks for the opportunity to present on this. So Mel and I are going to talk about sort of the Bega Group and how we're approaching emissions reporting reduction and our approach to circularity as well. So we've got a few slides we'll run through. Do you want to go to the next one, Mel? So I just thought we just thought we'd start with a sort of, I'm sure a lot of you know who the Bega Group is, but I guess this is a kind of map of where our factories are. We've got a footprint of, I think, 19 or 20 factories now across Australia. We've got one in Western Australia and a lot on the eastern seaboard. And then we've got a number of brands that are under the Bega Group, which is that picture on the right there. I guess it's kind of important to look at the history of Bega as well. Between 1899 and 2000, we were just Bega Group as a co-op. So that's over 100 years of being a co-op. And from the year 2000, so the last 25 years, we've grown with kind of purchases of Tatura, Strathmerton, Vegemite, and then Lion Dairy and Drinks. So as you can see, the brand portfolio has expanded with those purchases as well. So we just thought we'd go through what scope 1, 2, and 3 is for us. So with scope 1 and 2, they're all our emissions from factories. So the scope 1 is the ones that we're in control of, and scope 2 is the purchased emissions from electricity or gas. But then our scope 3, which is kind of what we're focusing on today, is that footprint from cradle to grave of our whole product. So we've got upstream activities and downstream activities, and those upstream activities are really kind of those capital goods, how we run our factories, how our goods get transported to us, the ingredients we purchase for our products, and then the waste generated from those operations, any business travel or employee commuting, and leased assets. So that kind of shows what our upstream is, but then we're also responsible for the downstream effect of those emissions, and that's the transporting of our goods and then processing of goods. We do a lot of ingredients as well, and we're responsible for the processing of those sold products. And then the use of the sold products, their end of life, back one, Mel, sorry. The end of life of those sold products, and then further on sort of investments and anything else we've got there. So it does include complete from the farm to the end of life, even for packaging or waste product. Next one, yeah. So a few years ago, we did a baseline of our scope 3 emissions, and as you can see, scope 3 emissions actually take up 90% of our emissions footprint, and scope 1 and 2 are 10%. So that is quite a large part of our emissions footprint that we're responsible for. And breaking down that scope 3, 70% of those emissions from scope 3 are from milk. And then we've got all the other components as well. And then when we look at that even further, the next layer down, there's that 70% of the milk emissions, 57% of that is enteric fermentation. Then we've got all the other components that contribute to that scope 3 emissions on farm. So this is just looking at what our company targets are. So we've got a strategy we're about to launch, which kind of resets how Bega are approaching sustainability. And one of the pillars is circularity. So that kind of umbrellas how Bega Group are working to reduce emissions and just operate in general. And so the two pillars under circularity are emissions reduction and resource efficiency. So emissions reductions, we're really aligned with the SBTI, which is net zero by 2050. And then we've got an intermediate goal of 40% reduction, which is an absolute reduction by 2030. And then for scope 3, our target is really just to support and collaborate with our suppliers to measure and mitigate scope 3. We haven't set a target yet. We will probably do that in the next sort of 3 to 5 years, I would say. And then under circularity as well, we're looking at how we can improve how circular we are, but also measure that. So circularity for us means eliminating waste, working with our partners to meet sustainable packaging priorities, as well as reducing those resources like water in our manufacturing processes. So there's a real drive at the moment for scope 3, and Mel and I just thought we'd put together sort of where the main pressures are for us as a manufacturer to monitor and reduce on-farm emissions. As you can see, because the on-farm emissions are our major footprint in scope 3. So there's 4 main sort of pillars there. There's government, our drive to be circular, our actual internal goals, as well as the corporate goals. And I guess the main thing around government is that just a few weeks ago, the Australian Sustainability Reporting Standards were approved and will commence from January the 1st. And that puts us in a position where we will have to start reporting scope 3 emissions as a part of their plan by FY26. So they've put scope 3 reporting off for a year, but then that will also have to go through assurance. So Bega Group falls into that group 1 from the Australian reporting standards. And so we're liable to report and get that assured in the first year. in the second year of reporting for those standards. Back one, sorry, Mel. Yeah, so I've gone through what the bigger group sort of driver is, but then there's also that corporate driver where actually all of our customers are asking us how we're monitoring and reducing our Scope 3 emissions. So that comes through from our customers, the retailers, and also investment agencies as well. Next one. So as you can see, this kind of illustrates the juggling act that we've got with all of those drivers and how we're trying to encircle that with circularity. In terms of our factory, how we're achieving circularity through the factory, and Mel will talk a little bit about the farm piece, but I thought it would be interesting to look at how we're trying to be circular in our manufacturing. So we've got, as I said, we've got a few different elements that contribute to resource efficiency. And so we're looking at using, finding a use for every part of our ingredient, even the waste, and also just reducing the amount of waste that a production includes. We're working at looking at designing packaging in a different way so that we make it reusable or renewable. We've spent quite a lot of time and effort in the last few years to include a high percentage of recycled content into our packaging, and are partnering with national groups on soft plastic recycling and just recycling schemes in general. And then also we're looking at water, reducing the amount of water, and also reducing how much energy we use, and making use of those renewable sources that we have access to. I might just move along to, so this is some of our results from the last financial year. So we're making great progress with reducing packaging, but this is all a part of the factory results. Might move to you, Mel, now and talk through some of the on-farm work that's going on.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jane. So I work in our for the Bega Group, but in working milk supply. So I support the our farm from all our suppliers with their on-farm sustainability. And so through this, we've got growers that provide product from all sorts of areas. So sort of dairy farmers, peanut growers, citrus growers, and beekeepers. But our primary focus, and where our mainly focus is, on with dairy and milk production. And we run a program called Better Farms. You might see it on some of our packaging, but where we support to farmers to sort of help improve sustainability. And we're basically moving across from looking at moving towards a circularity approach. And we like circularity because in a circular economy, a process, it looks at sustainability, but it also looks at the economics of it. And so when we're trying to develop programs, it's got to work for the environment, it's got to work for the grower, and it's got to work economically. Or else it's not going to work. So that's the reason why circularity fits in nicely with what we want to do. And so when you look at our footprint for dairy, you can see that we've got dairy farms across every state except the ACT and the Northern Territory, and we basically have got milk supply officers and teams in each of those areas that support our farmers. So when we look at circularity and the key areas that we're looking at, we've targeted the top inputs for a dairy farm. So they're the areas where we're focusing attention first, and then we're also looking at social license areas that we need to sort of improve on. And so when we're looking at for our Scope 3 reporting, we're going to have to start collecting data from farms, and we're trying to do that in a way that's as painless as possible. So what we're really focusing in on, what is the key data that we need to collect, and then how do we do that to reduce the time that we're taking for farms to have to provide that data. So we're doing it in a voluntary way. We're paying our suppliers for their time to do that work. And we're also trying to make it so when our field officers come out, we're only going to take an hour of our farmers' time in terms of the data that we're trying to collect. So we're trying to keep it as painless as possible, but as useful as possible. So emissions is just one area that we're covering. It's in circularity where we're looking at a bit broader, but yeah, and emissions is just one component of it. So from a circularity and looking at as an emissions level, when you do when a farm does a sort of puts their data through an emissions calculator, often it just comes out with what their gross and net emissions are, what their net emissions are, and it gives them a sort of an emissions intensity figure. And for most farmers, they're not going to have a clue what that means. And it's just going to be very difficult for them to understand what that is. They may get a breakdown in terms of where the emissions are coming from, whether a lot of it coming from the cows, whether it's the pre-farm things you buy, electricity, or fertilizer inputs or manure from their effluent systems. But again, it doesn't actually tell you where to look first to try and improve it. So from a circularity perspective, this is sort of the broader sort of data or key performance data we're looking to collect. So you can see for this farm, their emissions intensity number, when you compare to the region, is a bit higher. When you look at their production in terms of kilograms of milk solids per cow per day, this is an indication of feed conversion efficiency, of how good the cows are at converting feed into a milk product and the product produced. You can see this farm, their milk solids per cow is a bit lower than the regional average, and the regional average is a bit lower than what their best performance farms are. So then we look at tonnes of homegrown feed. This farm is in terms of feed utilised from homegrown feed, is very low compared to the regional average, which is also reached fairly low as well. And then you can look at I'll go back a bit. When you look at their energy from purchased feed, the majority is coming from purchased feed. So it's a high input farm that's not getting the best production out of its cows. But then you look at the energy that they're utilising on farm, and dairy farms are high energy businesses. They're pretty efficient in terms of, compared to the regional average, they're pretty efficient. And their labour efficiency in terms of this is a lean operation. So they're operating at in terms of the number of people working on farms, fairly low. But you can see in terms of enteric methane and reducing emissions, if they need to focus in on how they can improve that milk production cow per day, and largely it's going to come from improving their homegrown feed utilisation. So this is sort of data where they can actually target where they need to spend their money, where they need to focus their energy. And it also provides us with information on how we can target our training for each region. So looking at from a circularity perspective, it gives our farmers a lot more information to work off, and it can be quite efficient in terms of how we train and provide training programs. So the Regional Circularity Cooperative is some really good things have come out of COVID, and this is one of them. So it's pretty much a vision came out of sort of a Bega Group, our chairman, Barry Irvin, talking with our main financier, as Rabobank, and looking at how we can actually better position ourselves going forward. And the Bega Circular Valley Project and the Regional Circularity Cooperative, which is the entity that's pulled together, made up of, it's a non-distributing cooperative. It's made up of foundation members and community members. But our main target is to transition the Bega Valley into a circular economy by 2030. So that means that we're looking to try and actually we're looking at baselining what all our resources come into it. The valley's fantastic in that it's only got sort of 3 roads going in and out of it. It's surrounded by mountains on one side and the ocean on the other. We can pretty much measure everything coming in and out, and it's largely an agricultural and sort of a aquaculture tourism based economy. So we're pretty much looking at trying to work out how we can actually optimize resources, how we can utilize resources better, and develop partnerships and collaborations between industries and people to try and see how we can actually improve utilization, how we can actually become more circular in terms of what's a waste product for one might be a resource for another enterprise. So in terms of some of the initiatives that we're going through, the Circularity Centre I'll go into a bit more detail with, but we've got a whole variety of programs related to aquaculture, looking at decarbonisation projects, heat exchange, energy projects, natural capital, looking at that option, looking at alternative funding opportunities, a whole variety of different projects, and it's an endless stream of things coming through. But we are looking to try and progress things, and it's mainly to do with working collaboratively with other people and through the partnerships that we're developing through this through the foundation members. We're actually getting a long way in terms of improving our understanding and the knowledge that we can actually share with other people. So it's a pretty exciting project where we can throw around ideas, and we use the Bega Valley as basically a test case, our sandpit. We can trial things, we can work out what works, what doesn't work, and then we can share it with everyone. So the Regional Circularity Cooperative, we're basically is going to be basically a site. It's going to be a place in the Bega Valley. It's based in Bega. It's going to be a place where we can actually showcase the circularity. So we will have a display. We can actually show where the inputs, outputs of coming in, and how we can actually improve over time. It'll be a facility that is going to be circular in itself in terms of the building materials that we've used, and also it will be have a cafe, restaurant, a tourism attraction in itself, and be able to actually place where researchers and people can collaborate to come together and learn, and how we can and share knowledge. So these are our collaborating partners, and we're growing all the time. But yeah, these are sort of the people that have really helped us get as far as we have, and will help us continue on in the future. But it's an exciting project. Bega Group is one of the driving forces behind it, and we're very keen to learn, because from here we can actually share what we learn to other regions and our other suppliers, and we can share what we're learning in the factories. So it's a mechanism where we can actually learn and grow together. So that's the end of there, and yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Melissa and Jane. Yeah, the work you guys at Bega are doing is yeah, really amazing, and I think as well, being able to talk about scope it 1, 2, and 3 emissions, and how it relates to you guys as a processor, and how it relates back to your to your farmers and your members and things like that. Is really helpful. So thank you. Our next speaker is Robert Poole from CVA Australia. And Robert, thank you for joining us. And this one might be a little bit different, because we're going to facilitate it as a little bit of a discussion. So, but I'll hand over to you, Robert, to give a quick rundown and intro of yourself.
And you're going to ask me some questions, Paul?
Yes.
Oh, that'll be good. Hi, everyone. Great to be with you. My background is a farm kid, grew up in the country in northern Victoria, dairy, grain and sheep, did an ag science degree, and then entered the corporate sector, mainly through dairy processing. But in the last 8 years, I was a partner at KPMG and now partner with CVA. I think, Paul, what I got an opportunity to do was to what I call create a link between the sustainability agenda and the operations agenda. Really connect, I suppose I jokingly say connect the head of sustainability to the head of IT or the head of operations. I still think this is a huge issue in business. I'll talk about the relevance of that to farming. I also got to work not just in ag, so I've worked in retail, particularly with Coles, but others as well. I've worked in the mining sector, and also in construction and also in waste. So, I think I'm happy to contrast ag to those challenges, because we are in the big four, probably, in terms of contributing to emissions. So, what are others doing? And I love working in those other sectors. I think that's been a really exciting part of what I do. Anything else in background, Paul, do you think I should talk about, or you want to jump into a few of those issues?
Yeah, I think you've covered it pretty well. So I'll just ask you, quickly to, talk us through what you see as Australia's agricultural value chain, and how that relates to the economy and other industries, and where we're at in terms of sustainability.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll talk about the other industries first, because I want to contrast ag to them. Yeah, and I think there is a bit of a problem in the sense that we are very infatuated by the energy, especially the stationary energy sector in Australia. And that creates a few issues, which I'll explain. I think all of us as individuals and consumers or voters in Australia know about the energy sector and what's happening there. So, you've essentially got an asset transition. You're closing coal-fired power stations in particular, and you're investing in renewable infrastructure. So it's an asset transition, and all of the issues that brings. So that's fine. I think that's we are all involved in that debate every single day, and it impacts ag, particularly. And I think one of the areas where that's poorly debated is gas, and particularly gas for manufacturing. We tend to debate gas at household, which is not, I don't think, a really big issue. I think the bigger guys, I'm sure, would agree. Gas at manufacturing is actually a more critical transition. Construction, similarly, it is a generational asset transition. As we shut down a build, as we tear down a building, we build a new one. As we build a new road, as we build a new dam, we would aim to replace that with lower emissions construction materials and a lower footprint and high circularity. And by the way, if you're in Victoria and you're in the big build, I think it's 5% of contracts must come from social employment. So, there are the big three coming into construction, and I've had the opportunity to work with a construction company where their biggest concern was that they couldn't tender anymore, particularly in Victoria, because they couldn't meet the low emissions alternative products, and they couldn't meet the social employment requirements. So there was actually cases of disruption of construction where companies can't tender, and that will flow through the building industry. I think construction's a really interesting one, Paul, because of government tender requirements. That it's a bit of it shows where disruption could occur if that occurred in grains, for example, that occurred in food and agriculture. Yeah. So construction's an interesting concept. Waste, I think, is really, really interesting. I like to sort of say to people, well, there will be no landfill in 20 years. So imagine a life where there's no landfill. So what does that mean if there's no landfill? That means essentially you've got this above ground mining construct where all materials are reused. And, I think that's moving quite quickly. I think that's a really interesting area. But again, probably doesn't get quite enough attention because of the attention that's on stationary energy.
Yeah.
So there's three of the big four: energy, construction, waste. Then there's agriculture. Now we're totally different. When we're not in an asset transition so much, we're in a farm systems transition. So we're actually going from, farming a certain way to farming a different way.
Yeah.
Now, in particular, that's going to be in livestock because that's where the huge amount of our emissions are. And in particular, presumably how we feed livestock and how we either grow different types of plants or feed things that will, interact with the rumen. There's also stuff in soil and fertilizer in particular, which I can talk about as well. So I think where we don't want to go is to be we're not in an asset transition, we're in a farm systems transition. And I worry that we've kind of created the logic that will be ACCU-based and that will be kind of like an emissions trading model. I'm not sure that's going to work in ag, because if you take dairy, for example, most dairy farmers who've got good soils already have maximised soil carbon. So, in actual fact, the farmer that's contributing the most is potentially set to gain the least. So we need to really rethink that, in my view. I've said this many times before. If it was me with ag, I'd probably almost start again. And that is not in dispute with what the Bega team is doing. Thinking about it maybe differently in terms of, and not getting trapped into this ACCU model of, I think the early debate in agriculture, Paul, was ACCUs, and I think that's quite negative as a construct. But yeah, a few thoughts there.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think, yeah, there's definitely a lot of opportunities in agriculture. And as you say, we're not in an asset, you know, shift. We're, changing the way that we do and increasing our efficiency of production and sustainability and things like that. And so what do you see as sort of moving forward the state of play for agriculture in its sustainability, and how do we move forward with all these other industries and reduce our emissions, decarbonize and maintain production?
Yeah, so let me talk briefly about some of the work I do. So I try and, as I said in my intro, I try and link the head of IT to the head of sustainability, and the rest of the company too. And what my objective is to take the key sorts of data that you need and build that into business as usual, like the Bega example. Companies run on functions. So pretty much every company, Paul, you go and look at on the ASX or in the world, they're basically going to have a CEO, and then you can just rattle them off. They're going to have a CFO, a head of legal and risk company secretary, nowadays a chief technology officer. They're going to have a head of operations, maybe head of sales.
Yeah.
So companies are very structured like that. And the data is structured through SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, these big software systems. So what I'm saying to people is the ESG elements of that, we need to build them into everyday functions, just like we do with quality, OH&S, finance itself. So that if I'm in procurement and I'm buying 90% of the footprint of the company through my scope 3, that has to be in every legal contract, that has to be taken account of in every sourcing decision as BAU, as business as usual. So that's a really important concept that we now, like, if I said to you that quality was something new, you wouldn't contemplate it as something outside the normal course of business.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that ESG is coming out of the sustainability office and into these functions at the core process level. If we can do that, I'm confident that's the secret to success.
Yeah.
In ag, likewise, we need to utilize our existing farm systems. So I've been in ag all my life. Dairy sat in our industry. We invented in 30 years ago. Mass balance fertilizer calculators we created 30 years ago. I'm working with cotton with my BMP. I've just done the wool review. All of these industries have quite structured apps, functions, which are based around integrity and are based around sustainability. So we should build on those like Bega is doing. And then we should think about that data in that systems way. So how does that flow into the systems of our food manufacturers, and how does it flow into the systems of our retailers? Because as the Bega team said, we're now only 1, 2, or 3 years off every company in Australia above, I think, what does it go down to, about 50 million or something like that revenue. We're having to report these ESG type measures. So we're in that supply chain. That's good news. Think about it as a system. Think about it as data capture. And like any other material, we're going to report in probably to procurement, or in the case of a food company, some sort of accumulation farm lead. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, that data, sort of that, corporations and processes and everyone else is looking for from farmers to really report on for those regulatory requirements. And I know Jane and Melissa, you touched on those from Bega as well, and Robert. Yeah, so it's really is this, as part of the supply chain and the value chains, farmers are having to really think about this now. So
yeah, and what I advise, Paul, is that no, if you're Lenovo and you're producing the computer that we're talking on today, you know, another way to describe that principle is that there's a digital twin of this computer, and you know the core elements of it, the battery, the metal, the plastics, they'll be required to report down to those individual components at a digital twin. So there's a massive amount of new data.
Yeah.
If I was going to go and buy this computer today, the consignment note that came with it when it was delivered to Officeworks might have, you know, its basic name, its component, its speed, the speed of its processor, I don't know, the make and model. Whereas in the future, we'll have a lot more data. We might have another 20 or 30 fields of data describing the end of life use of this computer, that it's going to go into the close the loop factory, that it's been built in these certain factories with modern slavery, you know, approval, and the emissions factors that sit within the computer as well. And, you know, those emissions factors need to be right down to the factory that we sourced it from.
Yeah.
Because a Lenovo computer built in factory A may have a different factor than factory B. And I've worked in construction where, you know, you could be sourcing low emissions concrete on one day, but then that gets disrupted, and on the next day you're not getting that. You need to be able to have data systems that are quite flexible, almost down to the individual load of concrete that's coming onto the building site, Paul.
Yeah, great. And I think yeah, I might ask a question that someone has asked in the RSVP form around you know, where this sort of reporting requirements are coming from. So obviously we talked just before about the climate related financial disclosures. But is there any you know, particular country, market, you know, industry that's putting demand and pressure on supply chains to report on emissions?
Oh, the benchmark's always Europe. Always. I don't think I've ever seen a case, there probably is one, where some other country has progressed more than Europe. And that's true with most things. So, you know, I was talking yesterday about the approval of drugs and chemicals in APVMA. They use models out of Europe, you know, and so the European Union requirements are more detailed and deeper, in the sense that you need to go into the supply chain and assess risk at a deeper level. My understanding of what the requirements are, say, as drafted in the US, aren't quite as detailed as that, and we're probably more similar with where we're heading to the US. But, you know, because we're an internationally traded product in ag, as you know, and as we talked with grain, the European Union is often the canary in the mine, and they'll say you can't import canola without these requirements, for example. So, you know, we must continue to look at Europe in terms of a trade requirement, because this will not necessarily be regulatory from Australian government. It may be compliance to the trade requirements of Europe, for example.
Yeah. And so if I'm on farm and I'm a farmer and I'm wanting to know my number and, you know, having to report on that, you know, is there a particular way you think going about that, or do you see that?
Yeah, look, I have a strong view on this, where we've got emissions factors at the moment. So what we're talking about reporting in the near term is very simple mathematics of, you know, here's my number of cows. You know, as the Bega team was reporting, quite rapid and I'd say efficient, easy to do reporting. And that's okay. That's what we've got at the moment. But quite quickly, we're going to need to move to a system where it's more bespoke, and we're going to need some new standards, for example, to demonstrate that our emissions are actually coming down. And that means certain practices are going to have approvals. We're going to need some new protocols. That's part of rethinking how ag participates in emissions, because, you know, obviously we're going to have feed treatments and we're going to have some fertilizer treatments, and we're going to have things that will need the universities to give us evidence base, because we will need interim targets. You know, it's at the moment, basically no food company in the world has a Scope 3 target other than 2050. So Woolies has adopted science-based targets, for example. Woolies should have interim targets for beef and dairy and other forms of ag. So if we're going to have an interim target at, say, 2035, then we will need to demonstrate that I'm now feeding my cows differently, and I can prove that their emissions have halved as a result.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to quite quickly move away from emissions factors and move into this kind of more detailed reporting of farm practice.
Yeah.
Otherwise, by definition, we'll never reduce our emissions. We'll
Yeah.
just be reporting mathematics.
Yeah.
So we will have to go into a more sophisticated form of reporting
Great.
quite soon, because
Yes.
Woolies will require it, for example.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a really good question for us to end our personal discussion on, and maybe open it up to everyone else. So to Jane, Melissa, and Zach. Zach, I might pose a question to you, if that's okay, that someone has specifically asked you, which would be, will growers and farmers see any pressure from grain growers to know their on-farm growing emissions footprint, allowing for premium price at the bunkers, similar to how the livestock green industry has done with a tiered approach?
Thank you. I think I understand the question. I mean, Grain Growers, the organisation, won't force anyone to do anything. I mean, what we're really working on at the moment is our grain sustainability framework, which is at a whole of industry level, and which tries to basically work out the most material issues that our sector needs to address, covering not just, I guess, the environmental part of ESG, but also, a range of other things like, farm safety and those sorts of things. And then secondary to that, we've obviously just done a range of meetings and engagements with people on the ground to help them better understand what their emissions factors are. We've just released a Carbon Calculators Compared Report 2.0, which looks at, some of the tools and methodologies out there and how they might best work for a farmer. So we're really trying to help inform the person on the ground to understand the number, should they want to know it, more so than looking at how does the market actually push an incentive through to the grower, and then whether they receive more at the bunker or not. And I'm not meaning to be cute and sort of avoiding that. I mean, I think like everyone in agricultural advocacy, if there's a huge amount of work and compliance that a person has to undertake, and if there is benefit somewhere in the value chain for that, it doesn't seem fair that someone else in the value chain gets the benefit of that work and not the farmer themselves. But I think that's kind of, relatively well understood in ag value chains, and we've got to work through that. Are there premiums, or as Robert said, is it merely doing something because that'll ensure ongoing market access into a market like Europe, which says we have to have an ISCC certification or equivalent? More often than not in our sector, it's the latter. There isn't necessarily a premium. There's a market access or a market that you're not going to be able to play in if you can't prove to that market that you're doing something in a certain way. Did that? I can have another go if that didn't answer it.
No, I think that's answered the question quite well. I'll ask this one, and maybe Jane or Melissa, you might be able to answer it. What role do you see certification and especially traceability playing in helping farmers to secure their place in future supply chains?
That one's a critical one. So traceability is already critical for our operation. So we already have our quality systems in place where we measure and monitor from the milk quality side, everything that comes onto the into the factory. So particularly from a milk side, that traceability is built into our systems and it's already critical. Where it comes from with sustainability reporting, with our Scope 3 reporting, the level of rigor there is yet to be worked out. We need to get to reasonable assurance, and then to get from limited assurance to reasonable assurance. But what that actually means hasn't quite been identified yet. So we're developing the best we can based on a model where we don't want to put too much pressure on impost on farmers, but way where we can provide information that's good quality, but what level of assurance or auditing it has yet to be determined.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any response to that, or I think Melissa, you've done a good
And
job.
on the first question too, Paul,
Yeah,
because you know, I guess there's no hiding from the fact that GrainCorp and all the big grain companies will have to report, just like Bega will have to, as the Bega team's described. So, you know, it is a game changer in terms of the new legislation, because that means every company, it is 50 million, the bottom line, isn't it? The lowest level. So I think by 2028, every company over 50 million revenue has to report. So that's pretty much everyone in terms of the, you know, grain accumulators, dairy accumulators, all the agricultural companies. And that's without Coles and Woolies taking a firmer view, which I think they will in the not too distant future. So the New Zealand model is know your number. That's coming in now. That's in the current year, where every New Zealand farmer will have to report. So
can I add to that as well? I think the legislation is, I have to look through the latest version of it, but the previous versions did have a clause in there without undue cost or effort. And I think that was put in there deliberately to not spin all the agricultural industries that hold up Australia too much. However, there's the other aspect of our customers, whether they be national or international, requiring what they require. So in some respects, you know, the pressure for Bega Group comes from two main areas, and we have to kind of satisfy both of them to a certain level.
So Jane, to that point of view, and I think you've described it perfectly well, there's a feeling of inevitability around where we're going on this. You know, it's just a matter of how we transition to it. The Kiwis have gone kind of all in, and that's easier for them. But you know, I guess when you combine your customers to the regulatory requirements, farmers, I'm assuming, should be and are getting ready to lift reporting.
And I guess the other point is to your comment earlier about moving from reporting to actually mitigating.
Yeah.
I think in dairy, the main issue is that there is no commercial product or solution yet. So it's hard for us to put a target on something where we don't know what the cost and effort is to reduce. So hence we don't have a Scope 3 target yet, because it given the majority of our emissions are from milk, it would seem kind of foolish to say we're going to reduce it without knowing how or how much it's going to cost. Yeah. And the cost probably won't be on us anyway.
Yeah, and I think I always encourage people. I think there's also been a sense caused by the energy debate. Sorry, Paul, I'm taking over here. Caused by the energy debate, that it almost makes it feel like we do have to do it tomorrow, because, you know, the construct, the psychology of energy is knock down the old assets and build new ones. Whereas, to Jane's point, that's not actually the challenge in ag. You can't just, you know, I guess some people would argue we could get rid of all our cows, but assuming that's not going to happen, we have to transition livestock production over 20 years probably. So we do need time on our side, Paul, and we do have to give the researchers and the scientific community time, and the farmers, of course, time to transition.
The challenge with it, and one of the projects we're looking at, is actually it's not fair that the cost actually gets taken. It's okay for everyone to set targets, but the end of the person who can't actually, the farmers have got a the ones where a lot of the costs going to have to fall on them, and it's not fair that they actually have to do that alone. So working out how we actually share the cost
Yeah,
of
it's
implementing this
farmers.
change across the value chain is going to be critical, because it's easy for people up the further chain to set targets, but if they don't actually contribute to the cost of actually implementation, it's not going to
Yeah.
work. So that's the part of it, is actually working out how we share that cost, because it's not fair that it all falls on farmers.
Agree. Yeah.
Agreed.
Mm.
And well, I think yeah, there's a lot of discussion around emissions, and that's something that is going to be worked on, given, the changes that are happening so rapidly over the last, few months, and with the passage of legislation now. So Zach, another question to you, and I know you discussed food security in your presentation. How much importance is placed on food security for Australians versus export when prices rise, and how should government policy respond to this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I don't think I like the idea of trading them off
No.
against each other. Do I care more about the hunger of an Australian compared to the hunger of someone else? I think, we have to take a global view of how do we feed an increasingly large population with, more challenging, productive environments. I think the Australian government probably doesn't place enough emphasis on the importance that Australia has as a provider of food to food insecure nations, or the provider of food on an international market. My view is we tend to think that because in the grain sector we export 70%, we only use 30% domestically, that we've got more than enough and food security isn't an issue for us. We know that there's Australians that can't access the nutrition that they need, and we know that our supply chains are vulnerable, and there could be a scenario where we can't get fuel into Australia and we're not able to produce the amount we produce today. Our strategic fuel reserves are in the United States.
Yeah.
That is a fairly decent ocean trip on the water to get that to us, to get it refined, to get it into our tractors. Now, in a future environment, tractors might not need diesel, and that's an exciting proposition, but that's a long way from now. So I think we need to really look at, the provision of food, in its totality, and how does Australia fit into a global environment. And the second thing is, I think, the CSIRO's last deep analysis of the Australian grains emission profile worked out that for us to get to net zero, we'd have to reduce land area significantly, and we'd have to compromise production significantly. And I think sometimes governments and others don't necessarily look at what that would actually mean if it was to eventuate. So it's one thing to say, we like the idea of zero. It's another thing for an industry that doesn't yet have the tools available. What does that actually look like in terms of output? And so from an organisation like ours that has a little bit to do with research and development, I would say what we really need to be doing is focusing on, are we investing enough in the right places to get the tools available so that we can have our cake and eat it too? And what I mean is, so that we can get ESG outcomes and be productive in the way that we are now. And all of the points previously made, there's a whole lot of exciting opportunities at our fingertips, but there's also some really difficult things that we've got to overcome. What's our big no-till revolution next? I'm not sure. How do we farm, and produce the same with less? We're going to need science and R&D to help us get there, but hopefully we don't have to compromise one to get the other.
Great answer. And I think that answers another question as well, which was, where do you see the trade-off between food security, given climate volatility and production, versus ESG reporting requirements in export markets? So I think, yeah, you may have touched on both of those. So thank you.
Paul, can I comment on the
Yeah, of course.
point from Bega about who pays? Because I think this is the one that has challenged people a lot. Again, I think the ACCU, and remember the joke where it says someone asked the farmer, how do I get to Dublin, and you don't start from here.
Yeah.
Because we've started with ACCUs, I think we created a false logic of how farmers generate income from this, from ESG services. So I've written a couple of papers. I wrote one 4 or 5 years ago. I much more like to define it as eco services. the minute you define this problem as it, or this area of work as eco services, you actually start to switch on a totally different form of thinking around. So we should be paid to do eco services is if you want to think of it fundamentally like that. And particularly as it comes to reporting and being part of a model where we reduce the footprint of the product on behalf of the retailer, for example. So one of the models I conceptualized on how to price that is the concept of what would it cost? Let's say the dairy industry formed a data model where it could report everything that was required for Coles and Woolies. And that cost, pick a figure, $50 million a year, which is, in the scheme of things, Paul, nothing. You know, in the scheme of the farm gate, in the scheme of milk sales through retailers, that's in the multi-billions. So that's an eco services model where we say, as farmers and as companies, we're going to report that up into a very strict structured format. And by the way, we're going to help you reduce your emissions. That $50 million is then paid into the industry and essentially distributed through the supply chain to the farmers for the eco services they provide. So it comes back to this ACCUs. I think there's only 250 registered projects in ACCUs in Australia. I'm not sure how many of them are actually really functional. Whereas if we move to eco services thinking and we move to reporting into the supply chain, it totally changes the construct of revenue flows and what it would cost Coles and Woolies to go and replace that and actually do it themselves.
Yeah.
You know, if they actually have to go and set up that model, it would cost them a lot of money in agriculture to do that. So that's what I would encourage people to do, is to actually think about it differently. It's the theme of what I talk about is actually the construct of energy and ACCUs and those kind of starting points. It was the wrong place to start.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, it's not like that in agriculture. We're doing biodiversity support. We're doing circularity. We're doing farm systems change. We've got to recognise that what we do is different to stationary energy, where those cap and trade models started to form.
Yeah, and it's
So,
that mind shift.
I think if it was me, I'd work with the NFF and I'd have a summit to reform the logic of the model we want to run.
Yeah.
And I think it's an eco services model, not a cap and trade kind of logic.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for your insights. I might ask this question because it's been posted twice. How do you engage stakeholders, farmers, and where necessary, co-design outside of standard legal requirements? I think that was in relation to the bigger circular economy, perhaps, or if anyone else has any answers.
Yeah, I'm always an advocate for your work with the willing. So we're designing something that is engagement on a voluntary basis, and we, in terms of the information that we provide, it's got to provide usefulness for farmers. So in terms of collecting data, the aim is to provide a report back to farmers that they find of value in. And so that way, we'll get adoption of what people wanting to participate, rather than this saying, look, we need this information because we need it. But if we can collect the information and actually analyse it in a way and provide a report back to farmers that's useful for them, that helps them to make change, then it's going to be easy for them to want to be involved. And we'll get the majority of our farmers wanting to participate in a positive way and in a way where we can actually see outcomes and change better. But yeah, this setting targets and say and you have to apply, you have to participate in. We're not going to get anywhere with that approach. We have to work collaboratively. A lot of the information and a lot of the things that we need to do, we don't have the answers for. And we need to actually work with farmers to work them out, because they've got some great ideas, and a lot of the initiatives and a lot of things we do are going to come from farmers, and they're going to come from other people as well. So we need to work in a very collaborative environment to say, we don't have the answers here. We need to come up with some solutions, but we don't have the answers. We can help by collecting this data, providing feedback back. We can actually work on some ideas. But yeah, we need to work in a collaborative space, not a we know best space.
Yeah, great. Thank
And
you
just
for-
adding to that as well, I
Yeah.
guess it's the spirit of circularity as well, where we all work together, and the end goal isn't necessarily a target figure. It's about having the circular economy in full flight in our communities. So the goal isn't reporting and just getting emissions down. It's about the whole farm system working in a circular way, and then extending that out across the product's life. So that's the approach that we're taking.
Great. I think, yeah, it sounds a really great approach, and there's definitely a lot of work in Bega that you guys are doing. That's really, really interesting. And perhaps this question might be something that you guys could also answer is if you have examples of regional short value chain coordinations that reduces products emissions and food emissions. And I'm wondering if maybe that might be something that's within the Bega circular valley.
We've got a great project that honestly we didn't come up with ourselves. We're just we're highlighting it. But there's a little company called Ocean to Earth, and so they started off on recognising that there was a lot of aquaculture waste, fish waste that was going into landfill. And so the guy that actually involved with this, the two brothers, and one started out as picking up garbage. Then he moved into an aquaculture system, and then he started working for a forestry company. And he realised the waste products from each of those things were, he didn't like where they all ended up. So his brother, who's a biochemist, worked out, okay, if we combine all these things together, we can come up with a fantastic compost. And that compost is brilliant because it's made out of fish waste. They're composting it. So they're taking fish waste, they're turning it, getting the waste from sawdust waste or bark chips from the forestry industry. They're putting a little bit of milk with it, which is off product that actually they're getting it free from the general store down the road. But they are putting that together and creating a really good compost that is fantastic for gardens. Developed up, they're selling it through a major retailer. But we're also, they are also looking at ways they can actually turn that into a compost tea that we can turn into an agricultural product that we can use. So we've got dairy farms trialing their product, and it's really exciting in terms of it'll be a sort of a replacement potential made locally that actually be made out of the food waste and the waste products that would be going into landfill anyway. That can actually be basically a fertilizer replacement that's made locally here. So that's a one that I cannot take credit for, but they are doing a fantastic job. That where we're helping them is basically linking them up to other industries, and certainly everywhere we sort of mention these guys, they are in hot demand, particularly in places that have generated a lot of fish waste. But they're that's an easy one in terms of if we can get that going, we can solve a fertilizer issue, we can solve a waste issue. And we can generate a whole new little economy based out of collecting these products and recycling them through the systems.
Great. Sounds like an amazing initiative. And I think we might have time for one more question, which was posted in the chat. That if the panelists had one priority for FCA to do to support farm system adjustment, what would that be? So I might start with you, Robert, and then if anyone else wants to touch on it.
As in the one thing that we would do now?
Yeah, one thing you'd like to see from us at Farmers for Climate Action.
Well, as I say, I and I say it tongue in cheek because I just want to be provocative, but yeah, I'd have a summit to redesign the way that we participate in this kind of ESG reporting model. I think it needs a redesign, and it's come out of this problem that we started with ACCUs, and I think what Bega's doing is on the right track. It's a broader suite of measures. If I'm a dairy farmer and I've got the highest level of soil carbon so organic carbon as a proxy, I literally physically can't get it any higher, Paul.
Yeah.
I have done 100% the right thing, and that's almost the opposite, Mel and Jane, to what ACCUs are.
Mm.
So, that's just a simple example of where we've started in the wrong spot.
And you don't
So
get acknowledged for it.
I do a redesign of agriculture's participation in ESG reporting, and then we can also incorporate the flow of benefits for eco services and get Coles and Woolies and other big players to form part of that new systems approach, because it can then contemplate the data flows, and that is what I do, Paul. I know that's a huge. I'm not being very specific there, but it's I kind of let's this is a perfect time for us to redesign this model.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think that's a great suggestion. Does anyone else have any suggestions?
I'll have a crack, because I think it's the same as what grain growers should do. Anything to help empower farmers in this process. We get too many questions from farmers that they feel arm's length from it, feel like it's all pushed upon them, feel like they've got no power or understanding of where all this is coming from, and therefore aren't in a position to do probably what they want to do, and that's continue to farm and thrive and do all of the things that good enterprises and businesses do. So anything to empower farmers and give strength to their arm, is only going to help our sector meaningfully engage with this inevitable juggernaut coming towards us.
Great. Thanks, Zach. I think, support for farmers is something that, is really needed with all of these, things that are emerging around regulation and reporting.
We want to keep farmers farming. That's what they do best. We don't need more people sort of collecting data. So we just need to take that. We need to work out systems that we can collect that data that's useful for farmers, that is not a burden.
Yeah. Great. Anything else? Because if not, I think we have gone, well into all of these topics and themes, and it's been great. So thank you, Zach, Melissa, Jane, and Robert. Those presentations and discussion that we've had has really unpacked, a lot of what's occurring around emissions reporting, disruptions, things that are all sort of confusing and complex and changing as we head down this road. So thank you all for giving us your time. The session was recorded, so we will post that later today. And look forward to seeing everyone at another webinar down the track. So thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks so much.
See you.